The Bengals have made some big additions in the trenches, specifically in the offensive line room. 2 6'8" monsters. Brandon Thorn is here to discuss both Amarius Mims, Trent Brown, and much, much more right now on Locked On Bengals.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi again, everyone, and welcome into the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm James Rapien. Thank you so much for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And shout out to all of our everydayers out there. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow wherever you get your podcast. Without further ado, let's get to Jake and me talking with Brandon Thorn from Trench Warfare about all things Bengals offensive line.
Brandon, let's start with the newest additions to the Bengals offensive line, those being the draft picks, of course, and Amarius Mims, the most high profile of those. You scouted offensive linemen for the draft for Bleacher Report. To me, Amarius Mims looks like a player that's going to be a good pass protector, has some work to do in the run game, is inexperienced, obviously, but there's a lot of folks that are calling him a high bust risk because of that inexperience. What were your thoughts on Amarius Mims as a prospect, and do you see a big bust risk with that inexperience?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you have to put it into context. There's always a bust risk with pretty much everybody. And, especially when you don't have a lot of film to go off of, I think that generally increases. So I do think that there's probably a fair, risk here. It's not the reason why it's not super high, considering he's only played, 7 or 8 games or whatever it was. For me, at least, is because, well, first of all, like the physical traits and all that, I think everybody knows about, just kind of how he looks, how big he is, how he carries it, most importantly, and just how he moves, all that stuff. Yeah. But also, I think the thing that really separates him to me was, for a guy being as inexperienced as he was, I didn't see a lot, if really any, glaring bad habits in his game, or like a ton of rawness, specifically in pass protection, like you touched on at the top, being like a good pass protector, maybe a little bit less as a run blocker. That's kind of how I saw it too, because he just has like natural pass protecting movement skills, that I think are pretty special, because generally, like, it's very difficult to, learn nuances of pass protection in terms of body positioning and set points and, hand placement, strike timing, all these things, when you're operating in space, usually take time because it's very unnatural and things like that. But for him, it just looked like it was pretty natural. And with all those physical traits, like, I would love to, and I would have loved to have like bet on that guy more than other guys with similar backgrounds that haven't played a lot. So that's why I was, pretty high on him, with my grade and my evaluation and things like that. I do think the run game will, probably be a little rocky early on. Just that's where I think he needs the most work. He's very raw there, but pass protection, man, I just think he could probably play right away and like do well there. And I think his floor is pretty high in that regard.
Brandon, from a fit standpoint, is this the ideal fit given what you just said? Because I think we all called him a risk going into the draft, but it's a pass first team. They're going to want to throw it a lot. And I know there are some that want the Bengals to run it more, but they know what they are, and they're going to drop back and they're going to throw it around with Joe Burrow. And so if he can be a quality pass protector, it's better than what they've had at right tackle over the past few years for sure. But it does feel like his floor might be a little higher and the risk is a little less because of where he ended up.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. I really think this is close to the ideal fit. I mean, like, I think this and Philly obviously was a really good fit. Somewhere basically where you have a veteran-led offensive line room with proven, like, quality starters at tackle that he could learn from and kind of get groomed under. I think that those were the ideal situations, and there's not a whole lot of those. So, aside from Philly, I think Cincinnati is one of those places that not only offers that, but they offer specific body types that are very unique across the NFL at tackle with Orlando Brown and Trent Brown, both 6'7", 6'8", 340, 350 plus sort of guys that, some teams have one of those, like Philly has Mailata, so that would have been kind of a cool guy to learn from, and he could pick some stuff up from, but since he has two of those guys that he can learn from that kind of, look like him size-wise, they're also very different guys. They're not just guys that look similar size-wise, but they play very differently. They have different skill sets, Orlando and Trent Brown, that is. So he can, kind of pick and choose different elements of their game, I think. And I just think it's such a cool fit for him, because he doesn't have to play right away and he has these two guys to learn from. And I don't think it could have gotten much better than this in terms of a landing spot for Mims.
I think in terms of where his strengths are, that's a big part of why it feels like a good fit. Just that good pass protector. You talked about the rare footwork. Where's the development for him as a pass protector? Because it seems like some of the things that you would expect to be issues for a player with inexperience, like bad footwork, bad hand placement, lack of awareness for various threats with twists and stunts and knowing where he should be in pass protection. Those don't show up a ton for him. Every now and then you see him overset or get beat across his face. But when you think about areas for improvement for him as a pass protector, where is he in need of some time to cook and be NFL ready in pass pro?
I think it's the typical kind of ways that most young pass protectors need to improve on, and you just really hit it, I think, and that's not oversetting guys, and really you overset typically because you're being set up to, through stutters, hesitations, especially in one-on-one situations where you don't have any sort of formational help or schematic help, and you're kind of operating in those situations, true drop back type of situations, and you have to get to your spot and not be manipulated by the edge rusher. And when you're facing the high level edge rushers who really know how to manipulate guys out of position, just having the discipline and the discipline to stay square, patient, not drift, and just you have to have really good spatial awareness. And usually that takes a lot of time to really hone in on and develop. So that's for pretty much all guys though. And even savvy veteran, like high level Pro Bowl veterans, they get manipulated and drifted out of position too against the real high level edge rushers. So, but I think that's really it. It's just, getting more comfortable in space and pass protection in those sorts of situations, and just having the discipline and the, in your body positioning, in your relationship to the rusher, throughout those reps. And it's just going to take, for most guys, usually it just takes time. Some guys are able to incrementally improve, dramatically improve, and some guys don't improve. But I think based on where he is right now, he will, probably incrementally, if not dramatically, improve over time. So, but yeah, it really is. You see it on tape. He would drift, overset, and get beat across his face. And that's going to be more difficult to not do, in the NFL with the caliber of pass rushers you face. So that would be one of the main things to me.
This episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. And BetterHelp's there to help you through that. Today, I want to talk about how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week. It could be Trey Hendrickson's trade request, T. Higgins' trade request, being a little fed up with these trade requests and this offseason drama in Cincinnati and the inability to just get deals done. Or maybe you're frustrated with the other side and the players. Could be something that is not related to football altogether, and BetterHelp can help you process those issues as well. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you can give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. You can visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, FanDuel.com/lockedon.
You hinted at it, his ability in pass protection to potentially translate right away. A lot of Bengals fans, and I get why, are frustrated the past couple of years. The rookies haven't contributed a ton.
Mm-hmm.
You think if called upon, and he doesn't have to start right away, we know who's going to start at tackle most likely with Trent Brown and Orlando Brown Jr., but do you think he could contribute this year and be their starting right tackle if needed?
Yeah, I think so. Just based on, him and what he can do in pass protection, and just the tools that he has in pass protection now, and then some of the, the movement skills that he has and the natural anchor. And, I think if you're able to anchor in pass protection and you have the size and the strength and the technique to do that, and you can play against power, I think that will give you a really good floor to kind of operate out of, because I think most pass rushers, they're going to test you first with power. And if you can't stop that, it's going to be a long day and you're probably not going to last very long. So that's really like step one in pass protection, is because that's kind of the easiest way that pass rushers can beat you. And that's typically how they want to attack you. So I think he does have a good natural anchor. So, with that said, I think that he could at least survive against those guys, and not just survive. I think he can do well, and kind of let his athletic ability shine when guys go to speed and things like that. Pass protection wise, I think he could definitely play as a rookie. Like I said, the run game stuff will probably be, just rocky, at first, specifically like getting fits on double teams and, working in conjunction with guys on combo blocks and being, the timing element of it all, footwork. He'll be able to, get out on screens and, maybe cut off some linebackers at the second level just because of his size and his athletic ability. But it's more of kind of the first level stuff where, he could be taken advantage of, get slipped off of blocks quickly and things like that. So, but I definitely think he could play early and do pretty well.
The tools are tantalizing in the run game. It's just the mental aspect, the timing aspect, and that's where the inexperience to me really shows up.
Mm-hmm.
The Bengals did add Trent Brown as well, and you referenced the body types and the ability to learn from these guys that are built similarly to him physically in some ways, height, weight, and length actually is a big factor. Something else for Mims that really shines is his recoverability with that length. Every now and then you see him get beat across his face, but he just has those 36-inch arms and he can push you past the pocket. But anyway, where I wanted to go with that question was, how much in your experience, you've talked to a lot of offensive linemen, obviously, through your work with trench warfare, through your pre-draft work and all the great work you do. How much are they learning from their peers, from their teammates, technique-wise, versus how much of that is happening in the offseason, how much of that is happening from the offensive line coach or the assistant offensive line coach? Because we've heard Willie Anderson talk about there's not much time for teaching technique in NFL practices. So obviously it has to happen somewhere, but is that a lot of player-to-player stuff in your experience talking to these guys?
Yeah, I think it's player to player and off season that's when you're going to learn technique. I mean, there's some programs, some coaching staffs where you can learn more technique than others in the NFL. There's a scale there, but I think it skews heavily towards not a lot of technique. It's mostly scheme. Offensive line coaches are run game coordinators as well, and so they really prioritize, scheme heavily. I think he's going to be picking Orlando and Trent Brown's brains, probably as much, if not more, for technique than the coach, and also I know he's working with Duke Manyweather and he's exposed to guys, he was exposed to guys in the draft process, just being around guys in and out, all the pro guys that Duke trains. So a lot of it is done there. There's a lot of like meeting of the minds, with players and, you look at schedules together, whether it's off season with guys on other teams or, your guys like with Orlando and Trent, like, okay, here's our schedule. Here's all the pass rushers we're facing, you have tape against him, this many times that you faced off. How do you approach it? Things like that. And they dissect the rusher and what he likes to do, how he'll attack you. And, So there'll be a lot of brainstorming, I would imagine there. And, I keep coming back to, especially Trent Brown to me, like I think is a really good guy to learn from in pass protection. I just have been a big fan of Trent Brown and pass protection in particular, his whole career going back to San Francisco. I just think he's a really good pass protector, and that's a great guy for Mims to learn from. In terms of taking advantage of his size, and knowing how to do that, size and length. And Trent Brown's like, I don't think he like tested well or anything like that, but he moves really well and on the field and pass protection. And I think that dynamic there is going to be really cool to see what he can pick up from him and how much he learns from him and stuff like that.
It's a perfect segue to Trent Brown and discuss who we expect to be the starting right tackle this year. You mentioned the pass protection. Obviously, on paper, that's what the Bengals want is a pass protecting offensive line. What does he bring to this offensive line?
A really high ceiling as a pass protector, I think, more than anything. I mean, when he's been on the field throughout his career, he's always been an above average at worst pass protector, at times very good, even dominant, stretches. You can get that out of him still, I think. The main thing with him is the differentiator between him and Orlando Brown. I think skill set wise, I think Trent Brown is a more skilled pass protector than Orlando Brown. It's just Orlando Brown has kind of this trump card of he's abnormally durable, and for a guy like Orlando Brown, like at his size, to be as durable as he is just, it's rare. So that's why Orlando Brown is valued, as much as he is, I think. Whereas Trent Brown, there's, he's in and out of the lineup, and that's been his thing his whole career. So that's what you have to, that's the give and take, right? So, that's kind of how I would sum up Trent Brown. And then also in the run game, it's a little bit more hit or miss there, but he has dominant stretches in the run game as well, specifically like the front side of wide, outside zones, kicking out the end man on a line of scrimmage and just creating a massive lane behind him. He could do that at a very high level. He can also do some things on the move in space and, line up targets and just kind of delete them out of the picture. So he has the ability to make an impact in the run game as well. So he's a really skilled player. It's just you're just not exactly sure how much you're going to see him on the field each season. That's just kind of up and down.
You talked about when he's going well, there are these flashes of dominance. Is that mostly just related to how healthy he is, in your opinion, or is it something else that comes or goes that leads to the dominant stretches versus the above average stretches, as you said?
Yeah, I think part of it is the durability and things kind of degrading over the course of a season. Also, when you just look at his skill set on film, I think, just there you could poke holes in everybody's game. And I think in pass protection with him, the holes that you can see are, being too reliant sometimes on two hand strikes or outside hand strikes and just losing quickly, guys timing up a swipe and getting him to the outside. I think maybe was it Trey Hendrickson or I don't know who it was this past year that gave him some trouble there. But you watch him against Philly and Josh Sweat one-on-one. Sweat got him a couple times in that game. But man, I mean, Trent Brown, if he ever, if he doesn't miss with his hands and he forces guys to come into him and he can get his hands on guys, I mean, he has like a resting play strength. Like it's commanding. Right. Yeah. And he had dominant reps against Josh Sweat that were really impressive. And Sweat, I think, is kind of similar to Trent Brown. Like he's as skilled as anybody in the league almost in terms of pass rusher, but, he's in and out of the lineup too. So, but for Trent to have sort of, if you watch that game, I think that's a really good one to watch because he has some, 6, 7, 8 dominant reps against Josh Sweat one-on-one. Island, true drop back type of reps. And then he got a couple times where, he gets swiped to the outside and will lose. And I think that there's, just a little bit of variance there in his consistency in pass protection. That's why he's not Trent Williams or, Lane Johnson or something like that. But I think overall when you watch him, he's always on an island too. Like he doesn't get a lot of help in pass protection throughout his career, depending on the scheme and stuff like that. So he's very comfortable being out there on an island. You don't need to scheme him too much help or, formational help or things like that. So that's another part that he brings, that's extremely valuable as well, I think.
Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the place you need to go right now. Whether you want to catch the Indiana Pacers against the New York Knicks and you're looking for NBA playoff tickets, maybe there's a concert that you really, really want to go to this summer, or maybe you're just trying to go to a Reds game and help them, snap their losing streak, because right now they've lost 6 straight as we record this. Well, regardless, Gametime is the place you need to go. And if you download the Gametime app today, you're going to be able to get tickets to the NBA. You're going to be able to get tickets to Major League Baseball, to the next live event that you want to go to for less. It isn't there isn't a app that is going to be more convenient for you. It is the most convenient app, and it's going to show you exactly where your seats are. And right now you're going to get $20 off with the Gametime app. All you have to do is download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Brandon, we've spent a lot of time talking about the tackles, and rightfully so, but the Bengals offensive line as a whole, how do you feel about it going into this year? Obviously, talking about Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, and Cordell Volson, along with the big tackles, and then Amarius Mims is kind of the sixth man. But how do you feel about this group as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I really like what they did at tackle to bolster the depth with Mims now. It's really nice to have a third tackle on the roster. So that's a big jump. But, the interior, there's just no depth, I mean, at least proven depth. I mean, I guess just looking at the depth chart on our lads, I mean, Cody Ford is your top,
that's
depth.
it.
Yeah,
that is it.
So if that's your top depth guy, I mean, you just don't really have much depth. I would say a lot of teams, most teams in the NFL don't have a lot of depth. So it's not like the Bengals are, standing out here too much, but I just did a podcast recently on the Packers, and I mean, like, they have depth, but that's the Packers. There are certain teams in the NFL that traditionally just, put a lot of resources into the position of offensive line, and they have really good depth. But there's few and far between, and Cincinnati's just kind of in that big glut of teams that struggle with depth at some position, either inside or outside. So yeah, aside from that, I mean, starter wise, that trio I think is fine. I mean, I like Alex Kappa a lot. He's their best player, I think, on the interior. Consistent, reliable, functional, above average elements to his game. Just a good starter. I think that's what he's been for forever now, so I don't really see too much changing there. And what they've been able to get out of Ted Karras, I think, it surprised me, just based on what he did in Miami and New England. And, he's always been, I think a serviceable starter is fair. He gets by. He can compete against most competition. However, the top couple tiers, when he's one-on-one in situations in the run game or the pass game, like, he's just kind of overmatched physically, I think, but he can function really well, within a scheme, and he brings a lot to the table in terms of versatility and then just leadership and things like that. So he's kind of a consummate type of pro, and like, there's a lot of centers that are like Ted Karras, that have carved out nice careers. So he's just one of those guys who you could probably replace any given year, but at the end of camp, you just find yourself like, man, Ted Karras won this job because he does the little things right. And, and that's just who he is. So I really have a lot of respect for guys like that. But, talent wise, it's closer to like midline, if not below average. And that limits you in some ways. And then Cordell Volson I think had an admirable, first couple seasons in the NFL, considering his background, where he was drafted, things like that. But I do think, he's the fifth best starter on the offensive line, pretty much without question. And just limited in terms of recovery skills, I would say, and pass protection, movement skills in the run game. But he's big and strong. Guys struggle to go straight through him, and he can hold the point of attack and, maintain the line of scrimmage and things like that. Kind of baseline stuff. But yeah, I mean, I will say I don't know that he is completely capped out either, just considering how early he is in his career. So, Roland, if he's your fifth best starter on an offensive line, you're not doing too bad. I guess that's probably the best way to say it. You could do better, but you can also do a lot worse. Trust me, just look at the depth charts in the NFL.
The two players you talked about where there are some talent gaps between the top end, of course, Cordell Volson and Ted Karras, both guys that the Bengals coaching staff loves in terms of their approach to practice, their approach to the game. Karras in particular, a major leader in the locker room, a leader in the city of Cincinnati, where his Cincy hat campaign took off and he had sold out tattoo events for the Cincy hat tattoos that he was doing. So major personalities there. And you kind of answered the question as to whether or not you think there's some development for Cordell Volson left, because turns 26 in July, going into his third year. The Bengals didn't see fit to bring in a challenge for Volson. They believe in him. How much upside do you think there is there? And where does that come from, in your opinion, when you look at kind of where those limitations are?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that approach, considering where he was drafted and how inexpensive he is, like, let's try to get the most we can out of this, kind of thing. And I totally understand that. I mean, if you can, land a guy who can, be a functional starter where they did in the draft, and, a guy who, still, came from a smaller school and still probably has some development left. I mean, like, why not? So, yeah, I totally get that approach. But in terms of getting better, I just think really it's going to be heavily technique reliant here, because I think kind of physically he is what he is, in terms of being a limited athlete, and maybe never a guy who's going to match up super well with like the high end 3 technique pass rushers and sub package guys and things like that. And, not being super explosive and things like that. But he has, I would say solid play strength, and then the size to kind of back it up. And if you can really improve technique and make these little adjustments with things like hand placement, strike timing, with your hands, and then also just general timing, snap timing, if you can really get good at anticipating the snap and getting off the ball quickly, you can increase your play speed and sort of mitigate your athletic ability or lack thereof. So there's a lot of different ways that guys who aren't the best athletes can become, longtime starting guys in the NFL. And it just kind of remains to be seen if he's going to do that. I'm not like super convinced that he will, but I also don't think that it's out of the question either. And considering what I said in terms of like salary cap implications and things like that, like, and the way that the offensive line is constructed around him, where he is the 5th best guy. So he's not like a guy who needs to be featured heavily. He's not your 2nd best starter. If that was the case, I'm sure they would have brought somebody in. But if you're the 5th best starter and you're cheap and you're, young and, you're making some improvement here and there, like, yeah, let's roll with it. So that's kind of how I see it, and I maybe that's how they think about it a little bit. I don't know, but I understand not bringing in a lot of competition. However, you would like more depth still, just on the interior overall.
Brandon, you mentioned depth, and it's something during the draft. The Bengals had 10 picks, and we were expecting them to trade up a couple of times. And we certainly looked at the interior offensive line depth of this class, like especially rounds 4 and 5 for the Bengals, but even rounds 3 through 5. And it was like, oh, well, they're going to take an interior lineman. Well, they wait till round 7. They get Matt Lee, someone who we thought would probably go earlier. What should our listeners and viewers know about Matt Lee? Because we think he has a shot to make the roster despite being a 7th rounder.
Yeah, I would agree there. I had a 4th round grade on him. So, I thought, even for us, a 4th round grade on our grading scale is a potential role player / contributor. So kind of a guy who can come in, compete for a job, and make a roster, So yeah, to get that in the 7th, I think is good value. The thing that hurts him is I don't know that he's going to have that guard versatility. So that definitely will probably make it more difficult to make the roster, to carry the amount of offensive line that you could carry on game day, and have a guy who's, pigeonholed into a position is difficult. So that's working against him. However, the things that you do like, I think it starts really with play strength with him. And just, I think he's coming from an extremely well-coached place at Miami, in terms of offensive line wise, technique wise, specifically as a run blocker. And then also in pass protection, his anchor is very reliable and sturdy. So if you're a center specifically who can anchor really well, that obviously is a huge plus against the nose tackles and stuff that you're going to face on the inside. And then if you're a skilled run blocker who has the strength to hold the point of attack and to create movement and things like that, then, I think that makes a lot of sense. And he comes from a downhill sort of run scheme at Miami, and I think that's what Cincinnati likes to do. So it's a schematic match there. So that's working in his favor. And then you look at a guy like Ted Karras, who, like everything we just talked about, I don't know that you're going to be competing for a job with Ted Karras because he has a lot of skins on the wall, so to speak. You're not going to come in and probably uproot him. But in terms of a backup role, there's not really a guy there that has anything proven. So, a backup center making the roster, I think, would make some sense. He's really going to, I think, probably have to clearly clear the bar of what I guess Trey Hill is the top backup there. The thing about Trey Hill is he has some guard potential there just with his size and things like that. So that's why I say I think he's going to really have to be a lot better than Trey Hill, because I don't know that he's going to have the versatility to match. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, the backup center spot will be interesting in Cincinnati. I just see Matt Lee as a future starter with that pass protection ability, the scheme fit that you're talking about there. The athletic ability suggests some upside still in the run game. I know he was 288 at the East-West Shrine Bowl, but I think he played at a higher weight. So I'm excited about Matt Lee. Everybody who listens to this podcast knows that I'm still excited about Matt Lee, and I will continue to be excited about Matt Lee throughout training camp and the preseason until we see him on the field. And that'll be exciting as well. Brandon, appreciate the time and detail as always. Great insight on these new additions to the Bengals offensive line. You can find his work in the Trench Warfare newsletter. Great stuff that I love to see. Has some tweets that I've mentioned on this podcast. I think the Matt Lee anchoring cut up that you did, I've mentioned on this podcast before in my excitement for Matt Lee. So Brandon, appreciate the time as always and the expertise on this Bengals offensive line.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to do, and thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Until next time, Bengals fans, that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.